Come Sedolin. Let the noise of the day fade into the background. Imagine, if you will, a quiet evening, long ago. The sun has set, casting long, deep shadows across a small stone room. A single candle flickers, its gentle light dancing on the rough-hewn wooden table. There's a stillness in the air, a profound quiet that we rarely experience today. Outside, the world is dark, save for the moon and a sea of stars. Inside, the only sounds are the soft crackle of the hearth and the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. In this quiet space, a simple meal is laid out, perhaps a thick slice of dark bread, a wedge of cheese, and a cup of cool water. It doesn't seem like much, but in this imagined medieval world, this simple fare is laden with meaning. It's more than just food to fill an empty stomach. It's a symbol, a test, a quiet conversation between the self and the soul. Tonight, let's drift back to that time to understand how even the act of eating could be a profound spiritual practice. Let this journey into the past be a gentle path, leading you toward a place of deep rest and peaceful sleep. Allow your mind to quiet, your body to relax, as we explore a world where every morsel carried the weight of morality and every meal was a moment of reflection. In the medieval mindset, the world was a tapestry woven with divine purpose. Every aspect of life, from the turning of the seasons to the pangs of hunger, was seen through the lens of faith. Food, in this context, was far from a simple necessity. It was a constant reminder of humanity's place in the grand cosmic order. The bounty of the harvest was a gift from God, a sign of his benevolence. But the desires of the body, the craving for more, for richer, for sweeter, were seen as a potential snare, a test of one's virtue. Gluttony was not merely overeating. It was considered one of the 7 deadly sins. It represented a loss of control, a surrender to the basest of earthly desires at the expense of spiritual elevation. To eat with moderation was to exercise discipline, to prove that the soul, not the stomach, was in command. This wasn't about deprivation for its own sake. It was about finding a sacred balance. The body needed nourishment to serve its purpose, to work, to pray, to live, but to indulge it excessively was to risk chaining the spirit to the physical world, forgetting the higher calling of the soul. Imagine a monk in his sparse cell, breaking his long fast with a piece of bread and some watered-down wine. Each bite is deliberate, each sip mindful. He is not just eating. He's practicing gratitude, humility, and self-restraint. His simple meal is a prayer in itself. This mindset wasn't confined to the monastery walls. It permeated society. The common farmer, giving thanks for his bowl of pottage, understood that his sustenance was a blessing. The noble, though surrounded by plenty, was taught that temperance was a virtue befitting his station. Food was a constant, daily test of one's character and faith. Now, let's think about the act of fasting. In our modern world, we might associate fasting with diets or health trends, but in medieval times, it was a deeply spiritual discipline. To willingly abstain from food was to intentionally weaken the body's hold on the soul. It was a way of purifying the self, of creating an inner quiet where one could more clearly hear the voice of God. Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter, was a period of collective fasting, a time when the entire community shared in this act of penitence and preparation. Denying oneself certain foods, meat, dairy, rich sauces, was a tangible way of turning away from worldly pleasures and focusing on spiritual matters. It was a shared sacrifice that bound communities together, but it was also a personal journey. The gnawing feeling of hunger was a constant reminder of one's dependence, not on bread alone, but on divine grace. It was believed that in this state of physical want, the spirit became more sensitive, more open. Prayers were thought to be more potent, contemplation more profound. Fasting was a way to recalibrate one's priorities, to remember that man does not live by bread alone. It was a cleansing of both body and soul, a quiet and powerful act of devotion. The very types of food people ate were steeped in a moral hierarchy. Think of the earth, the water, and the sky. Foods that grew closest to the heavens, like fruits on high branches and birds that soared in the sky, were often considered purer, more refined. They were seen as lighter, less earthly, and therefore more suitable for the nobility and the clergy, those whose lives were meant to be closer to the spiritual realm. Think of a brightly colored apple, a delicate songbird. These were foods of light and air. Conversely, foods that came from the ground-root vegetables like turnips and carrots, or animals that lived in the mud like pigs were seen as base and coarse. They were the sustenance of the peasantry, whose lives were tied to the soil and physical labor. This wasn't just a matter of cost or availability. It was a reflection of the great chain of being, the belief that everything in creation had its proper place in a divinely ordered hierarchy. Eating a turnip was not just eating a vegetable. It was participating in one's given station in life. This cosmic ordering of food reinforced the social structure. Yet, it also gave every meal a sense of place and purpose within a much larger, sacred system. Even the preparation of food was guided by these principles. Spices, imported from faraway lands, were more than just flavorings. They were exotic, expensive, and believed to have medicinal and even spiritual properties. Using spices was a sign of wealth, but it was also thought to transform the nature of the food itself, elevating it. A dish heavily seasoned with cinnamon, cloves, and pepper was not just tastier. It was perceived as more refined, moving it further away from its raw, earthly state. Think of the medieval kitchen, a place of alchemical transformation. Simple ingredients were combined, cooked over fire, and seasoned to create something new. This process mirrored a spiritual ideal, the refinement of the base self into a more perfected soul. The cook, in a way, was a partner in this moral ordering of the world, helping to align the act of eating with the spiritual aspirations of the age. Every choice, from the cut of meat to the sprinkle of spice, was imbued with a layer of meaning that went far beyond simple taste. It was all part of a larger story, a story of order, hierarchy, and the soul's journey toward the divine. And so, as you lie here, letting the day recede, feel the weight of these thoughts settle gently. This isn't a history lesson to be memorized, but a feeling to be absorbed. A sense of a world where even the most ordinary act was part of an extraordinary, invisible drama. The quiet satisfaction of a simple meal, the inner strength found in restraint. The idea that what you consume can shape who you are, not just physically, but spiritually. Let the image of that quiet, candlelit room return. The simple table, the humble fare. There is a deep peace in that simplicity, a release from the endless choices and pressures of our own time. Here, in this imagined past, there is just the gentle rhythm of need and fulfillment, hunger and gratitude. There's a rightness to it, a calming order. Let that sense of order soothe your mind. Let the quiet of that medieval evening become your own. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to figure out. Just breathe, in and out. Feel your body growing heavy, your mind becoming still. You are safe. You are at peace. Allow yourself to drift, to float on these thoughts as they carry you gently, softly, into a deep and restorative sleep. Good night. Good evening. Settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift away with me. Tonight, we journey back in time to a place of quiet contemplation. Imagine a long, stone hall, bathed in the soft, flickering glow of candlelight. The air is cool and smells faintly of old wood, beeswax, and dried herbs. This is the dining hall, the refectory of a medieval monastery. It's late, the sun has long set, and a profound silence blankets the world outside these thick walls. Inside, long wooden tables stretch the length of the room, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of use. Simple benches line each side. The monks have already had their meager evening meal and have retired for the night, their soft-soled sandals whispering on the cold stone floors. Now, the hall is empty, save for the dancing shadows and the ghosts of countless shared meals. It's in this silence that you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the quiet clinking of spoons against wooden bowls, the soft rustle of woolen robes. The atmosphere in a place like this was one of deep reflection. Every action, every meal, was steeped in meaning. The food they ate was not just for sustenance, it was part of their spiritual practice. And one of the most significant aspects of their diet was what they chose not asterisk to eat. During many times of the year, especially during periods of fasting like Lent, meat was absent from their tables. The decision was deeply symbolic. In the medieval mind, meat wasn't just food. It was often seen as something heavy, something that could stir the passions and weigh down the spirit. It was linked to earthly desires, to excess, and to the temptations of the world outside the monastery walls. To abstain from it was an act of discipline, a way of purifying the body to elevate the soul. It was a conscious choice to turn away from worldly indulgence and focus inward on prayer and connection with the divine. By eating simple vegetables, grains, and perhaps a little fish, the monks sought to lighten their physical being, hoping to make their spirits more receptive and clear. The silence of this hall, even now, seems to hold that intention, a quiet testament to a life of deliberate simplicity. Let's stay in this tranquil space for a little longer. Feel the peacefulness of the empty hall wrap around you like a warm blanket. The candlelight throws long, gentle shadows that sway and merge, creating a slow, hypnotic dance on the stone walls. Outside, a lone owl might hoot, its call a soft punctuation in the vast quiet of the night. Inside, there is only stillness. The very air seems thick with peace, a peace earned through discipline and devotion. The monk's diet, especially during these times of abstinence, was a lesson in appreciating the simple gifts of the earth. Imagine their meals, a hearty vegetable stew, perhaps, simmered for hours over a low fire. The flavors of carrots, onions, and parsnips melding together. The ingredients would have come straight from their own gardens, tended with care and gratitude. There would be bread, dense and dark, baked in their own ovens. The taste would be wholesome, nutty, and deeply satisfying. Maybe a small piece of cheese, made from the milk of their own goats or cows, offering a sharp, tangy counterpoint to the humble bread. Each bite was taken in silence, not a hurried or thoughtless act, but a mindful one. As they ate, one monk would often read aloud from a sacred text, his voice a steady, calming presence in the hall. The words would wash over the others, nourishing their minds as the simple food nourished their bodies. It was a holistic experience, where the physical and the spiritual were intertwined. They believed that a simple diet led to a clear mind, free from the fogginess and agitation that rich foods could bring. It was about finding contentment in less, discovering a richness and simplicity that the outside world, with all its feasts and banquets, often missed. Think of the seasons and how they shaped the monastery's menu. In spring, the first tender greens would appear in the garden: lettuce, spinach, and young herbs. These would be a welcome sight after a long winter of root vegetables and dried beans. They would be eaten fresh, their vibrant taste a celebration of new life and renewal. Summer brought a bounty of fruits and vegetables: plump tomatoes, crisp cucumbers, sweet berries. These were gifts from the sun, enjoyed in their peak freshness. The monks would work in the gardens themselves, their hands in the soil, feeling a direct connection to the source of their food. In autumn, as the air grew crisp, the harvest would come in. Apples, pears, and grapes would be gathered. Vegetables like pumpkins and squash would be stored for the winter. It was a time of abundance and preparation. They would preserve the summer's bounty, making jams, pickling vegetables, and drying herbs. This work was done with a sense of purpose and foresight, ensuring they would have sustenance through the cold, dark months ahead. Winter meals would be comforting and warming. Thick soups, roasted root vegetables, and hearty grain porridges would fill their bowls, providing the energy needed to endure the cold and continue their daily round of prayer and work. This rhythm of life, so closely tied to the earth and the changing seasons, fostered a deep sense of gratitude. They were not just consumers of food. They were participants in its creation. They understood the effort, the patience, and the touch of grace required to make a seed sprout and bear fruit. This understanding infused their meals with a reverence that is hard to find in our modern world. They were keenly aware that every spoonful was a blessing, a gift to be received with thanks. This quiet life of simplicity and contemplation wasn't about deprivation for its own sake. It was about creating space. By removing the distractions of elaborate meals and worldly concerns, they made room for something else to grow: inner peace, spiritual insight, and a profound sense of connection to a higher purpose. The silence of the dining hall wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of potential, a canvas upon which a richer inner life could be painted. It was in this quiet that they could better hear the subtle whispers of their own souls. As we rest here in our imaginary monastery, let this sense of peace and simplicity wash over you. Let go of the complexities and demands of your day. Allow your mind to quiet down, just like this great hole after the evening meal. Feel the gentle weight of your blanket, the softness of your pillow. Your only task right now is to breathe. In and out. A slow, steady rhythm, like the quiet cadence of a monk's prayer. Let each breath be a small act of letting go, releasing any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, or your hands. The monks found joy not in having more, but in needing less. They discovered that true richness lies not in material possessions or sensory indulgence, but in a peaceful heart and a quiet mind. It's a timeless lesson, one that we can all benefit from, especially in our busy, noisy world. As you drift closer to sleep, perhaps you can carry a small piece of this monastic peace with you. The idea that by simplifying, by quieting the noise, we can find a deeper, more lasting form of contentment. The candles in the refectory are burning low now, their flames getting smaller, softer. The shadows on the walls grow longer and deeper, merging into a gentle darkness. The stone hall is preparing for its own deep sleep, holding the quiet prayers and peaceful intentions of all who have passed through it. The moon rises high in the sky, casting a silvery light through the tall, arched windows, painting stripes of pale light on the floor. The world is hushed. All is calm. All is well. Allow yourself to sink into this profound peace. Let it carry you gently into a night of deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Close your eyes and breathe deep. Imagine a world before our time. A world where the air was thick with the scent of the unknown. Picture a bustling port city. The sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows from the masts of towering wooden ships. These aren't just any ships. They are treasure fleets, having braved months, even years, on treacherous seas, guided only by the stars. They don't carry gold or jewels, but something far more precious, something that has traveled thousands of miles from lands shrouded in myth and legend. The creak of the ropes, the calls of the sailors, the heavy thud of wooden crates being lowered onto the docks. All of this signals the arrival of a cargo that will change the taste, the scent, and even the very fabric of society. Inside these crates, nestled in coarse cloth and straw, lie the reasons for these perilous journeys. Dark, fragrant sticks of cinnamon, harvested from the inner bark of trees in a faraway island jungle. Tiny, wrinkled peppercorns, so potent they were once counted out, one by one, worth more than their weight in silver. And the small, nail-shaped buds of cloves, whose intense, warm aroma was said to be a piece of paradise itself. To the people waiting on these shores, these were not just flavorings for food. They were whispers of distant lands, of sun-drenched coasts and mystical gardens they could only dream of. The arrival of these spices was an event, a moment of magic where the exotic and the everyday finally met. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the promise of these rare, powerful scents. A sensory explosion in a world accustomed to simpler fare. For centuries, the story of spices was one of mystery and immense value. Merchants spun fantastical tales to protect their sources. Tales of cinnamon groves guarded by fierce winged creatures and pepper fields. These stories only added to their allure, making them the ultimate status symbol. A household that could afford a pinch of nutmeg or a dash of clove was a household of great wealth and influence. Banquets for kings and queens were not just feasts for the stomach, but displays of power, where mountains of spiced foods perfumed the entire hall, announcing the host's ability to command the farthest corners of the earth. Owning spices was like owning a piece of the map, a tangible connection to the world's most remote and enigmatic places. But with this incredible luxury came a moral debate. In the quiet halls of monasteries and the fervent sermons of cathedrals, a different story was being told. To some, the intense pleasure derived from these exotic flavors was seen as a dangerous indulgence. They argued that such potent tastes could ignite the passions and lead the soul astray from a path of piety and moderation. The pursuit of spices, with its high costs and the greed it inspired, was linked to the deadly sin of pride. To lavishly spice one's food was seen as a form of showing off, a way of declaring one's superiority over others. It was a temptation, a worldly delight that distracted from spiritual devotion. Was it right? They asked. To crave the fiery heat of pepper when one should be focused on the purity of the soul. This tension between pleasure and piety defined the role of spices in the medieval and Renaissance worlds. On one hand, They were celebrated in medicine for their perceived healing properties, used to balance the body's humors and ward off illness. Physicians prescribed ginger to warm the stomach and cloves to soothe a toothache. Spices were a vital part of the apothecary's toolkit, seen as gifts from nature, or even from God, to aid humanity. Yet, on the other hand, the sheer sensory delight they offered was viewed with suspicion. This intoxicating aroma, this explosion of flavor on the tongue, was it a harmless pleasure or a gateway to gluttony and sin? The same clove that could ease pain could also be seen as an unnecessary luxury, a symbol of the decadent excesses that moralists warned against. Imagine a wealthy merchant's wife carefully unlocking a small, ornate box. Inside, her precious collection of spices sits, each one a tiny treasure. She chooses a few peppercorns, a sliver of cinnamon. As she grinds them, the kitchen fills with an aroma that sets her household apart from all her neighbors. It's a scent of affluence, of worldliness. But perhaps later, in church, she hears a sermon about the dangers of vanity and earthly attachments. Does she feel a pang of guilt? Does she see her spice box not just as a source of culinary delight, but as a test of her own virtue? This internal conflict was very real. The desire for these beautiful, flavorful things from afar was constantly at odds with the call for a simple, humble life. The quest for these spices reshaped the globe. It fueled an age of exploration, launching mariners like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus across uncharted oceans. Nations went to war over control of the spice trade routes. The tiny Banda Islands in Indonesia, the world's only source of nutmeg and mace for centuries, became the site of brutal conflict as European powers fought for a monopoly. The history of spices is written in blood and ambition as much as it is in flavor and fragrance. The very map of the world we know today was drawn by ships chasing the scent of cloves and the heat of pepper. Entire economies rose and fell. Empires were built and lost, all in the pursuit of these small, dried pieces of plants. And so, the journey of spices continues, from being mystical treasures worth more than gold, to symbols of sin and indulgence, to the driving force behind global exploration. They have held a powerful place in human history. Today, we can find them in any grocery store, their once unimaginable cost reduced to mere pocket change. We sprinkle cinnamon on our morning coffee and grind pepper onto our dinner without a second thought. We have democratized this ancient luxury, yet, even now, they retain a whisper of their former magic. When you open a jar of cloves and inhale that deep, warm scent, you are connecting with a story that spans millennia and circles the globe. You are participating in a ritual that has captivated kings, inspired explorers, and troubled the minds of saints. Think about that the next time you cook. As you measure out a spoonful of turmeric or grate some fresh ginger, take a moment. Breathe in the aroma. Let it transport you. You're not just adding flavor to your food. You are adding a pinch of history. You are holding a piece of a long and fascinating human story. A story of desire, adventure, and the timeless quest for a little bit of magic. The spices in your kitchen are the descendants of that legendary cargo, the final destination of a journey that began in a distant land. On a ship guided by the stars, carrying a treasure more valuable than gold. And in that simple act, in that fleeting moment of scent and taste, the epic story of spices lives on. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden histories of our world. We'd love to have you with us. See you next time. Come, sit with me for a moment. Let's imagine the castle is quiet now. The great hall, once roaring with feasting and fire, is dark. The lords and ladies have retired to their chambers. Down here, in the heart of the keep, is the kitchen. The day's heat from the great ovens still clings to the stone walls, a gentle, sleeping warmth. The only light is a single tallow candle, its flame dancing softly, casting long, wavering shadows across the wooden tables and the rows of copper pots hanging from the ceiling. Outside, the world is wrapped in the deep blue of a medieval night, pricked with the silver of distant stars. The only sound is the gentle crackle of the dying embers in the hearth, and the sigh of the wind through a high window. It's in this stillness, this deep quiet, that we can almost smell the ghosts of the day's labors. The scent of roasted meats, of fresh-baked bread, of herbs hung to dry from the rafters. But there's another, more subtle aroma lingering in the air. A whisper of honey, of spiced fruit, of sweet, sticky confections. This is where the magic happened. This is where shugre, a substance more precious than some jewels, was transformed into delights for the high table. Imagine the cook, hours ago, carefully measuring out the precious grains, a luxury brought from far-off lands, his brow furrowed in concentration. For in this world, sweetness was not just a flavor. It was a statement, a symbol of wealth, of power, of earthly delight. But as the night deepens, another thought might creep into the quiet mind of a devout soul in this castle. In the flickering candlelight, that sweetness takes on a different meaning. It becomes a temptation, a siren's call away from the path of righteousness. The church fathers wrote at length about the dangers of the flesh, and what could be more fleshly than the indulgent, all-consuming pleasure of a honeyed tart or a piece of candied fruit. Gluttony, they called it, one of the 7 deadly sins. To overindulge in these earthly delights was to turn your back on the spiritual. It was a distraction from prayer, from contemplation, from the very salvation of your soul. That little flame, dancing on its wick, could almost be a preacher's wagging finger. It illuminates the sweetness, yes, but it also casts shadows of doubt and guilt. The pleasure of the tongue versus the purity of the spirit. This was a real conflict, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface of medieval life. That sweet taste, so desired, was also a reminder of human weakness, of the constant battle between the body's cravings and the soul's aspirations. In the silence of this kitchen, surrounded by the tools of feasting, one can feel the weight of that moral struggle. The sweetness was a taste of heaven, but it could also be the first step on the road to perdition. And as the candle burns lower, the shadows grow longer, and the quiet of the night holds both the memory of pleasure and the warning of its cost. Let us step out of that quiet kitchen for a moment and into the bustling world of medieval thought. To understand their relationship with sweet food, we have to understand their view of the body itself. It wasn't just a vessel, it was a battlefield. A constant war raged between the spirit, which yearned for God, and the flesh, which was pulled down by earthly desires. Food, especially rich and sweet food, was a powerful weapon for the flesh. It satisfied, it comforted, it delighted, and in the eyes of many theologians, that was precisely the problem. Think of it like this. Your spiritual journey was seen as an ascent, a climb up a steep mountain towards God. Every indulgence, every time you gave in to a physical craving, simply for pleasure's sake, was like taking a step backward, or even slipping down the slope. Sweetness was particularly suspect because it offered such intense, immediate pleasure with little nutritional necessity. It was pure, unadulterated indulgence. The Desert Fathers, early Christian hermits, who lived lives of extreme austerity, set the tone. They subsisted on the bare minimum: stale bread, water, a few wild herbs. For them, denying the body's cravings was a way to strengthen the spirit, to clear the mind for prayer and make it more receptive to the divine. This philosophy trickled down through the centuries and became deeply embedded in monastic life. For monks and nuns, mealtimes were not for enjoyment, they were for sustenance, and often accompanied by religious readings to keep the mind focused on higher things. Feasting was for the laity, for the worldly, and even for them, the church calendar was filled with fast days where meat, and often all rich foods, were forbidden. Lent was the ultimate expression of this, a 40-day period of self-denial meant to purify the soul before Easter. In this context, a marzipan sculpture or a sugar-dusted fritter wasn't just a dessert. It was a symbol of worldliness, a rejection of the austere spiritual path. It was a conscious choice to indulge the body, and in doing so, risk neglecting the soul. Of course, this doesn't mean everyone in the Middle Ages was living on bread and water. Far from it. The nobility, in particular, lived in a world of extravagant feasts. Their tables groaned under the weight of roasted swans, elaborate pies, and yes, incredibly intricate and expensive sweet dishes called subtleties. These were often sculptures made of sugar paste, depicting castles, knights, or mythological scenes. They were pure spectacle, designed to impress guests and display the host's immense wealth. So how do we reconcile this with the church's teachings? This is where the fascinating hypocrisy of the age comes into play. There was a huge gap between the religious ideal and the reality of aristocratic life. A nobleman might listen to a sermon on the evils of gluttony in the morning, and then preside over a 10-course banquet that evening. They squared this circle in a few ways. First, they could pay for their sins. Wealthy lords and ladies would make huge donations to the church, fund the building of chapels, or pay for masses to be said for their souls, all in an attempt to balance the celestial books. It was a kind of spiritual accounting. Second, there was a sense that these rules applied differently to different people. A peasant's gluttony was seen as base and animalistic. A nobleman's feasting, however, was part of his station. It was a performance of power, a necessary part of maintaining his social standing. His lavishness was, in a way, part of the divine order. He was meant to be magnificent, but even so, the anxiety was always there. The fear of damnation was very real. Many chronicles from the period describe nobles on their deathbeds, full of regret for their lives of indulgence, desperately trying to make amends before it was too late. The sweetness they enjoyed in life could leave a very bitter taste as they faced eternity. So, the next time you sprinkle a little sugar on your cereal or enjoy a piece of cake, take a moment. Think back to that quiet, candlelit kitchen. Think about that simple pleasure and the complex web of sin, status, and salvation that it once represented. It's a reminder that the way we think about food is never just about taste. It's about culture, religion, and the timeless human struggle between what we want and what we believe we should want. The story of sweetness is, in many ways, the story of ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this little journey into the past. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing for more stories from the quiet corners of history. Have you ever stopped to think about bread? Really, think about it. Look at this table. It's covered with all sorts of loaves, a crusty white baguette, a dense, dark rye, a soft, pillowy milk luef, and a rustic, whole-grain sourdough. They all look so different, don't they? So inviting. We see them every day, in bakeries, in supermarkets, on our own kitchen counters. But bread is so much more than just a staple food. It's a symbol, a story, a history, baked into every crumb. For centuries, the color of your bread said everything about you. This beautiful, airy, white bread. This was the bread of kings and nobles. It was a sign of wealth, of refinement. To make it, you had to sift away all the bran, all the germ, leaving only the pure, white, and dust. It was a process that took time, effort, and money. It was, in a way, a luxury, an indulgency. It represented a life free from hard labor, a life of softness and ease. Then, you have this dark bread, this rich, hearty rye or a dense pumpernickel. This was the bread of the people, the bread of farmers, of laborers, of anyone who worked the land. It was made from the whole grain, nothing wasted. It was nutritious, filling, and sustained you through a long day's work. Its dark color came from the very parts of the grain that the wealthy sifted away. It symbolized humility, practicality, a connection to the earth. It wasn't about excess, it was about sustenance. So, a simple loaf of bread wasn't just food. It was a clear line drawn in society, a visible marker of your place in the world. The rich ate white, the poor ate dark. It's fascinating how something so simple can carry so much weight, so much history. The next time you slice a loaf, just pause for a moment. What story is your bread telling? Tis division, this bread-based social hierarchy, wasn't just a European phenomenon. We see echoes of it across cultures and throughout history. In ancient Rome, the finest, whitest flour was reserved for the aristocracy, while the common folk ate panis sordidus, literally dirty bread, made from coarse, unsifted grains. Think about that. The very language used to describe their food implied a sense of impurity or lesser value. This idea persisted for thousands of years. In medieval Europe, the lord of the manor would dine on delicate white manchat bread, while his serfs ate maslin, a heavy bread made from a mix of wheat and rye. The whiter the bread, the closer you were to God, or at least, the closer you were to the king. It became an aspiration. To be able to afford white bread was a sign that you had made it, that you had climbed the social ladder. Even fairy tales are filled with this symbolism. When a character is poor and humble, they're often eating a dark crust. When they find fortune or royalty, they're suddenly feasting on fine white cakes and pastries. It's a powerful and enduring cultural shorthand. But what's incredible is how that narrative has completely flipped in our modern world. Today, walking into an artisanal bakery, which loaf often has the higher price tag, it's the dark, rustic, whole grain sourdough, the one packed with seeds and ancient grains, the one that boasts of its high fiber and nutritional benefits. The humble dark bread of the past has become the new symbol of a different kind of status, a status based not on inherited wealth, but on health consciousness, on education, on a choice to nourish our bodies in the best way possible. White bread, the former king of the table, is now often seen as the less healthy option. It's associated with processed foods, empty calories. We've come to understand that the parts of the grain that were once discarded, the bran and the jamar, actually where most of the nutrients are. So, the dirty bread of the Roman plebeians is now the healthy choice of the 21st century. It's a remarkable reversal. The farmer's dark loaf is now sold in boutique bakeries for a premium, celebrated for its complex flavor and digestive benefits. This shift tells us so much about our changing values. We've moved from valuing purity and refinement in our food to valuing authenticity, nutrition, and a connection to nature. We want to know where our food comes from. We want it to be real. And often, real looks a lot like that dark, dense loaf that was once a sign of poverty. But let's not be too quick to villainize white bread. It still holds a powerful place in our hearts and our memories. For many of us, the smell of a simple white loaf baking is the smell of home. It's the bread of childhood sandwiches, of toast with butter and jam on a Saturday morning. It's comfort food. There's a certain nostalgia tied to its softness, its simple, unassuming flavor. It's the perfect vehicle for other tastes, a blank canvas. And in that, there's a different kind of beauty. Think of Japanese milk bread, shakupan. It's incredibly white, incredibly soft and fluffy, and it's celebrated as a work of art. The technique to make it is precise and masterful. It's not about being rustic. It's about achieving a perfect, cloud-like texture. It shows that the story of bread is never just one thing. It's a spectrum of tastes, textures, and meanings. And beyond the color, there's the process. The slow, magical transformation of flour, water, salt, and yeast. The heart of so many breads, especially the rustic ones we admire today, is fermentation. This is where the real alchemy happens. Sourdough, for example, isn't just a recipe, it's a living thing. A sourdough starter is a culture of wild yeast and bacteria that you have to feed and care for, sometimes for years. It's a relationship. Each starter is unique, influenced by the flour, the water, the air in your own kitchen. It gives the bread its distinctive tangy flavor, its chewy texture, and that beautiful, open crumb. Baking with a starter connects us to a tradition that's thousands of years old. It's a slower, more mindful way of making food. You can't rush sourdough. You have to listen to it, watch it, work with its natural rhythm. This process of slow fermentation doesn't just create amazing flavor, it also transforms the grain itself. It begins to break down the gluten and the phytic acid, which can make the bread easier to digest and its nutrients more available to our bodies. So, the very process that gives the bread its character also makes it better for us. It's a perfect example of how ancient wisdom often aligns with modern nutritional science. In our fast-paced world, where so much is instant and disposable, the act of baking a slow-fermented loaf of bread feels almost like a rebellion. It's a commitment. It's a declaration that some things are worth waiting for. It's about taking simple, humble ingredients and, with time and care, turning them into something extraordinary. It's a creative act that nourishes both body and soul. And every culture has its own beloved bread, its own unique story. Think of the warm, pliable pita of the Middle East, perfect for scooping up hummus. Or de boubli, charred naan bread of India, slapped against the side of a tandoor oven. Imagine the slightly sweet, golden challah of Jewish tradition, braided to represent love and unity. Or the corn-based tortillas of Mexico, a staple for millennia. Each of these breads is perfectly suited to the cuisine and culture it belongs to. They are shaped by the local grains, the climate, the tools available, and the very rhythm of daily life. Bread is a universal language, but it speaks with countless different dialects. It's a thread that connects us all, a shared element of human experience that transcends borders and generations. It sits at the center of our tables, at the heart of our communities, a symbol of hospitality and togetherness. So the next time you're in a bakery, or even just walking down the bread aisle at the supermarket, take a second look. Don't just see loaves. See the stories. See the history of wealth and poverty, of science and tradition, of comfort and celebration. See the ghost of the Roman farmer, the medieval lord, and the modern artisan baker all standing there with you. Because every single loaf, from the simplest white slice to the most complex seeded rye, has a tale to tell. It's a story of who we were, who we are, and what we value. And by breaking bread together, we're not just eating, we're sharing in that incredible, ongoing story. Thanks for joining me on this little journey. If you found this interesting, consider liking and subscribing for more thoughts on the simple things that make life rich. See you next time.
The sun has finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and burnt orange. Inside the Crooked Billet Tavern, the world outside melts away. The day's work is done, the tools are put away, and the air is thick with the scent of old wood, spilled ale, and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco. A low fire crackles in the hearth, its gentle light dancing across the worn wooden tables and the faces of the men gathered here. There's a quiet hum of conversation, punctuated by the soft clink of pewter tankards and the occasional low chuckle. This isn't a place of raucous celebration, not on a weekday evening like this. It's a sanctuary, a liminal space between the labors of the day and the rest of the night. For the men here, a cooper, a blacksmith's apprentice, a couple of farmhands, this single tankard of small beer is a ritual. It's weak, more hydrating than intoxicating, and it's a comfort. It's a way to wash down the dust of the day, to soothe tired muscles, and to share a moment of quiet camaraderie. Out on the street, the world is shutting down. The watchman will soon begin his rounds, his lantern a lonely point of light in the growing dark. But in here, for a little while longer, there is warmth and companionship. The landlord moves quietly behind the bar, refilling a tankard, nodding in response to a muttered comment. He knows his patrons. He knows when one tankard is enough. This nightly ritual is part of the rhythm of life, as predictable and as necessary as the rising of the sun. It's a simple pleasure, a moment of peace earned after a long day's toil. This scene, or one very much like it, has played out for centuries. Alcohol, in its many forms, has been a constant companion to humanity. It's been a source of calories, a safer alternative to often contaminated water, a social lubricant, and a central part of religious and cultural ceremonies. For most of history, moderate drinking wasn't just accepted, it was completely normal, woven into the very fabric of daily existence. People drank from morning till night, not to get drunk, but because beverages like small beer and cider were staples of their diet. It was simply part of life. But alongside this casual acceptance, there was always another current, a deep-seated fear. It was the fear of the demon drink. While a cup of ale with dinner was fine, drunkenness was seen as a profound moral failing, a doorway to all other sins. This is the great paradox of alcohol in history. It was both a gift from God and a tool of the devil. Preachers and moralists thundered from the pulpit about the evils of excess. They warned that a man who lost control to drink was no longer in control of his soul. He was vulnerable to wrath, to lust, to sloth, to every temptation imaginable. This dual identity is fascinating. On one hand, you have the tavern as a community hub, a place of warmth and society. On the other, it's depicted as a den of iniquity, a place where fortunes are lost, families are ruined, and souls are damned. Think of the art from the period. You have cozy, cheerful paintings of peasants enjoying a drink and a song. Then you have the terrifying, moralizing prints of someone like William Hogarth with his Gin Lane and Beer Street, showing the stark contrast between wholesome, moderate beer drinking and the destructive chaos fueled by cheap gin. The fear wasn't just about sin, it was also about social order. A drunk person was unpredictable. They might start a fight, neglect their duties, or speak seditious words against the authorities. In a rigidly structured society, this loss of control was a direct threat. So, while society provided the drink, it also created strict social and legal controls to punish those who overindulged. Being fined or put in the public stocks for being drunk and disorderly was a common occurrence. It was a public shaming, a way for the community to reinforce its boundaries and say, this far and no further. So, how did people navigate this? How did they enjoy the pleasure without falling into the perceived peril? The key was moderation. It was a virtue preached by everyone from ancient philosophers to medieval monks. The idea was to enjoy the gift, but not to abuse it. The line was a fine one, and everyone understood the danger of crossing it. A man who could hold his liquor and remain a good husband, a good father, and a productive member of society was respected. A man who couldn't was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in taverns and taught to children. The Industrial Revolution dramatically changed this dynamic. As people flooded from the countryside into new, overcrowded cities, the old social structures and community controls began to break down. Life was hard, anonymous, and often miserable. For many, the tavern was no longer a gentle community hub, but an escape from a grim reality. And with new distillation techniques, hard liquor, especially gin, became incredibly cheap and potent. This is where the fear of alcohol really exploded. The gin craze in 18th century London is a prime example. The city was gripped by what many saw as an epidemic of drunkenness, poverty, and crime, all fueled by cheap gin. The sight of people, including women and children, passed out in the streets became common. The birth rate fell, and the death rate soared in the poorest areas. This crisis gave birth to the first real temperance movements. These weren't just religious moralists anymore. They were social reformers, early public health advocates, and politicians who saw the very fabric of society unraveling. They saw alcohol not just as a personal sin, but as a public menace. Their language was powerful and apocalyptic. They produced pamphlets, held rallies, and told heart-wrenching stories of families destroyed by the bottle. Their message started to shift from "do you want get drunk" to "do you want drink at all?" This was a radical idea. For the first time, total abstinence, or teetotalism, was promoted as the only safe and moral path. The argument was that for some, the line between moderation and excess was impossible to hold. Therefore, the only way to avoid the fall was to never take the first step. This set the stage for a cultural war that would last for over a century. The temperance movement gained immense power, particularly in the United States, Britain, and Scandinavia. It became a massive social and political force, closely tied to other reform movements like women's suffrage and the abolition of slavery. Organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League were incredibly effective lobbyists and propagandists. They framed the issue as a battle for the soul of the nation, a fight between the wholesome, sober home and the corrupt, destructive saloon. They used every tool at their disposal, songs, plays, and even early films, to depict the horrors of alcohol. The saloon was portrayed as the center of all evil, a place run by shadowy figures who profited from misery, where politicians were corrupted and working men were cheated out of their wages. The hero of these stories was the man who signed the pledge, vowing never to touch another drop, thereby saving himself and his family from ruin. This intense cultural pressure culminated in the ultimate legislative act, Prohibition. In 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution went into effect, banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. It was the temperance movement's greatest victory, the noble experiment that they believed would cure society of its ills. They genuinely thought it would empty the prisons, eradicate poverty, and create a healthier, more productive nation. Of course, we all know how that turned out. Prohibition was a spectacular failure. Instead of stopping people from drinking, it just drove the industry underground. It gave rise to organized crime on a scale never seen before, as gangsters like Al Capone built empires on illegal booze. It created a culture of lawlessness, as ordinary citizens flocked to secret speakeasies and became criminals just by having a drink. It also led to the consumption of dangerous, unregulated moonshine, which could cause blindness or death. The great irony is that prohibition may have actually made the perception of alcohol worse. Before, you had the accepted tradition of moderate drinking. During prohibition, drinking became an act of rebellion, something exciting and illicit. The speakeasy, with its secret knock and cocktails, designed to mask the taste of bad liquor, added a new glamour to drinking that the old-fashioned saloon never had. When prohibition was finally repealed in 1933, America had a whole new, and in many ways more complicated, relationship with alcohol. So, when we look back at that quiet tavern scene, we see a world that is both familiar and alien. The simple pleasure of a shared drink is timeless, but the deep moral weight attached to it, the belief that a single substance could be both a divine gift and a gateway to hell, is a product of a specific history. This long and complex story, full of good intentions, unintended consequences, and shifting cultural tides, is still with us today. The debates we have now about alcohol, health, and social responsibility are echoes of these centuries-old conversations. Understanding this past helps us understand our own, often contradictory attitudes toward the drink. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. Ding dong, ding dong. Can you hear that? For centuries, that sound wasn't just a clock, it was a command, a sound that echoed through cobblestone streets, across quiet fields, and into every home. It wasn't a call to arms or a warning of fire. Imagine waking up not to the smell of bacon frying, but to the deep, resonant toll of that bell. No decadent cheese, no eggs, no lard. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was a societal expectation, a spiritual obligation woven into the fabric of life itself. The bell didn't just mark the time, it marked a shift in your very existence, creating a quiet, simmering tension in the air. This practice of religious fasting wasn't just a medieval curiosity, it was a powerful force that shaped society for over 1,000 years. From the early days of Christianity, leaders sought to create a rhythm of spiritual discipline, a way for the faithful to connect with God through. It was about taming the desires of the flesh to elevate the spirit. The idea was simple. By giving up certain foods, you were humbling yourself, remembering Christ's suffering, and purifying your soul. And the church calendar became a roadmap of this spiritual journey, dotted with days of feasting and, more importantly, fasting. Initially, the rules were somewhat fluid, but by the Middle Ages, they had become incredibly specific and widely enforced. The big ones were Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter, and Advent, the period before Christmas. But there were also countless other days scattered throughout the year. Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays were often designated as fast days, as were the vigils before major saints' days. When you add it all up, a person in medieval Europe could be fasting for up to a third of the year. Think about that. Nearly half your life, the food you could eat was strictly controlled by the church bell. So what did people actually eat on these days? If meat and all animal byproducts were out, what was left? The answer was fish. Fish became the star of the show on fast days, so much so that it fundamentally altered economies. Fishing industries boomed. Entire towns and coastal regions owed their prosperity to the church's dietary rules. Salted cod, dried herring, and pickled eels became staple commodities, traded across vast distances. Rivers were meticulously managed, and ponds were built by monasteries and lords specifically to ensure a steady supply of freshwater fish like carp and pike. Fish wasn't just food, it was big business, a symbol of piety that you could buy and sell. But it wasn't just fish. The plant kingdom became a playground for creative cooks. Breads were a constant, of course, but people also relied heavily on vegetables, grains, and legumes. Think hearty pottages made from peas and beans, thick soups flavored with herbs from the garden, and root vegetables roasted until sweet. Fruits, both fresh and dried, provided a touch of sweetness, and mix them with water to create a creamy, versatile substitute used in everything from sauces to desserts. It was a clever workaround, a way to mimic the richness of dairy without breaking the rules. However, this is where the social tensions really started to show. For the poor, a fast day might not have looked drastically different from any other day. Their diet was already sparse, centered on bread, grains, and whatever vegetables they could grow. Meat was a rare luxury anyway, but for the wealthy, fasting was a performance. It was a chance to display both their piety and their riches. Their chefs would go to extraordinary lengths to create lavish, fish-based banquets that were anything but austere. You'd see fish sculpted to look like roasted boar, elaborate pies filled with exotic seafood, and sweets made with expensive sugar and spices. This created a strange paradox. The act of self-denial became a vehicle for extravagant consumption. The poor fasted out of necessity and faith. The rich fasted with flair and ingenuity, turning a spiritual discipline into a culinary spectacle. And people were always looking for loopholes. The definition of fish became surprisingly flexible. Beavers, with their scaly tails and aquatic habits, were sometimes classified as fish. Puffins and certain types of geese that lived near water were also, conveniently, put in the same category. It seems that if it spent enough time in the water, a clever theologian could make a case for it being acceptable on a fast day. This kind of creative interpretation shows just how deeply people felt the restrictions and how much they longed for the savory taste of meat. The enforcement of these rules was a serious matter. It wasn't just about personal conscience. It was a community affair. Priests would preach about the spiritual dangers of breaking the fast. Neighbors might watch what you were cooking. In some places, there were even Lent police who could inspect kitchens to ensure compliance. Getting caught eating meat on a Friday could result in a public penance, a fine, or, at the very least, social shame. The rules created a shared experience, but also a source of anxiety and temptation. Imagine the delicious, forbidden smell of a neighbor's secret roast wafting through the air while you were dutifully eating your salted herring. But as the centuries wore on, things began to change. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was a major turning point. Reformers like Martin Luther challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and many of its practices, including mandatory fasting. They argued that salvation came through faith alone, not through works like dietary restrictions. For them, fasting could be a private, voluntary act of devotion, but it shouldn't be a rule imposed on everyone. As Protestantism spread across Northern Europe, the collective, society-wide practice of fasting began to crumble. In England, after the break with Rome, the rules were relaxed and eventually faded away, though the tradition of eating fish on Fridays lingered for a long time. Even within the Catholic world, the rules started to soften. The Age of Enlightenment brought a new emphasis on reason and a skepticism toward old traditions. New foods from the Americas, like potatoes and tomatoes, were changing diets. The world was getting faster, more commercial, and the slow, agricultural rhythm of the medieval church calendar felt increasingly out of step. The church began granting more dispensations, and the strict Lenten fast eventually evolved into the more symbolic practice of abstaining from meat on Fridays, a tradition that many Catholics still observe today, but it's a faint echo of the all-encompassing system of the past. So, the next time you hear a church bell toll, take a moment. Remember a time when that sound governed not just the hour, but the very food on your plate. It's a story about faith and food, about power and piety, about community and control. It's a reminder that the simplest parts of our daily lives, like what we choose to eat for dinner, are often connected to vast, invisible currents of history, belief, and social change. The grand symphony of fasting days has mostly faded to a quiet hum, but its legacy can still be found in our traditions, our economies, and in the enduring human quest for meaning, one meal at a time. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what historical topic you'd like to explore next.
Have you ever sat down to a meal? A truly wonderful meal, and felt that little spark of pure joy? That moment where a flavor, a texture, a scent just makes everything else fade away. It's a simple pleasure, one we often take for granted. But what if I told you that this very idea, the idea of enjoying food for pleasure's sake, was once seen as deeply problematic, even sinful? For centuries, in many parts of the Western world, the act of eating was tangled up in a web of guilt and suspicion. It was a necessary evil, a requirement for survival. But to indulge, to savor, to find delight in it, that was seen as a weakness of the flesh, a distraction from the higher pursuits of the spirit. Think about the medieval mindset. Life was often hard, and the focus was on the afterlife. The body was viewed as a vessel, a temporary home for the soul, and its desires were something to be tamed, not celebrated. Gluttony wasn't just about overeating. It was about enjoying food too much. Feasts and famines were two sides of the same coin, and the daily bread was a symbol of sustenance, not satisfaction. Philosophers and theologians wrote extensively about the dangers of surrendering to appetite. Food was full, plain and simple. Its purpose was to keep you alive so you could fulfill your duties to God and society. This wasn't a world that had much room for food critics or celebrity chefs. The most virtuous way to eat was often the plainest, the most modest. A simple gruel, a piece of bread, a humble vegetable stew. These were the meals of the pious. Anything more was a step towards temptation. This strict view cast a long shadow, shaping how people ate, cooked, and even thought about food for generations. It created a culture where the pleasure of a good meal was something to be questioned, a guilty secret rather than a shared delight. But, as with all things, this wasn't destined to last forever. Slowly, quietly, the world began to change, and with it, our relationship with what's on our plate. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual thaw after a long winter of austerity. A big part of this change was the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, culture, and ideas. As scholars rediscovered the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, they found a different perspective. They read about Roman banquets and Greek symposiums, culturists that, while valuing moderation, also celebrated the joys of good food and drink. This sparked a new curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, enjoying the earthly world wasn't entirely at odds with a virtuous life. Humanism began to take root, placing a new value on human experience, intellect, and creativity. This extended to the kitchen. Cooking started to be seen less as a chore and more as a craft, even an art form. Then came the age of exploration. Ships set sail across uncharted oceans, and returned not just with gold and silver, but with a treasure trove of new flavors. Imagine a Europe that had never tasted a tomato, a potato, a chili pepper, or chocolate. These new ingredients didn't just add variety, they ignited the imagination. How do you cook this strange new tuber from the Americas? What can you create with these sweet beans from the tropics? The spice trade, which had long connected East and West, exploded. Cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper became more accessible, and their exotic aromas filled the kitchens of the wealthy, and eventually the not-so-wealthy. Trade didn't just move goods, it moved ideas. It created a more connected world, where a spice from a distant island could transform a simple European stew into something extraordinary. This global exchange broke down the monotony of the medieval diet and introduced the concept of culinary diversity. Food was no longer just local and predictable. It was becoming global and exciting. Alongside this explosion of trade, another revolution was quietly brewing. The scientific revolution. People like Galileo and Newton were teaching the world to observe, to question, to experiment. This new scientific mindset didn't stop at the laboratory door. It seeped into every aspect of life, including the kitchen. The old ideas about food, based on ancient humoral theory. The idea that foods were hot, cold, wet, or dry, and needed to be balanced, began to be questioned. Instead, a new understanding of chemistry and biology started to emerge. People began to think about food in terms of its properties, how heat transformed it, how different ingredients interacted. This was the birth of gastronomy as a field of study. Cooking became a science. Chefs began to document their techniques, to write down recipes with precision, moving from oral tradition to a codified body of knowledge. The first cookbooks that resembled what we use today started to appear, filled with detailed instructions and thoughtful combinations of flavors. This scientific approach gave cooks the confidence to innovate, to deconstruct old dishes and invent new ones. It validated the pursuit of culinary excellence. Creating a delicious meal was no longer a frivolous indulgence. It was an exercise in skill, knowledge, and artistry. Science had given permission for pleasure, framing it not as a sin, but as the delicious result of understanding the natural world. And so, the stage was set for food to reclaim its place as one of life's great pleasures. The strict moralizing of the past began to feel outdated, a relic of a darker time. In the salons of 18th century France, conversation, art, and fine dining intertwined. The restaurant was born, a place where anyone with the means could experience the art of a professional chef. Pleasure was becoming democratized. It was no longer the exclusive domain of the aristocracy. The emerging middle class, with its new disposable income, eagerly embraced this new world of culinary delight. Eating out became a form of entertainment, a way to socialize and experience new things. The focus shifted from mere sustenance to the entire dining experience. The ambiance, the service. The presentation of the food on the plate, the fork, once viewed with suspicion, became standard. Table manners became more refined. Dining became a ritual of pleasure. This new attitude blossomed, and food became a central part of culture, identity, and celebration. We now live in a world where food is a source of endless fascination. We watch cooking shows, read food blogs, travel to distant lands to taste authentic cuisines, and meticulously photograph our meals to share with friends. We have rediscovered what our distant ancestors perhaps knew instinctively, that sharing a meal is a fundamental human act of connection and joy, that the act of creation in the kitchen is a profound expression of love, that savoring a flavor is a way of being present, of appreciating the moment. The guilt has, for the most part, faded away, replaced by a joyful, and sometimes mindful, embrace of deliciousness. Food is no longer just fuel for the body, but nourishment for the soul. And now, as we let these thoughts settle, allow yourself to drift. A warm, comforting scent fills the air, a scent of bread baking, or a slow-cooked stew. Let that comforting thought be your guide as you drift deeper into rest. There is a simple peace in a good meal, a quiet joy that echoes through time.